to the right of woke. What does that mean? Which is like center?
Well, unless you, I don't know what it means.
It's been established. They're saying on X that Benjamin is woke right. So that's, we all know what it is.
Oh my God.
No,
really?
Benjamin.
What does
Good
that
morning,
even mean?
everybody.
What does it even mean?
I don't know
That's
who
a good
right
question.
of woke is. He looks a little bit like Benjamin Boyce, but he also a little bit like a stranger.
Why is your hair combed? Why are you?
Yeah, that's Leslie.
Yeah, you're groomed. What
She wanted me to.
I know. Jesus, what happened to you, man?
She really wanted me to present myself well for her
Funny,
show.
they're asking that on X too, Aaron. What happened to you,
God,
man?
What even happened to you? I love that question.
You gotten married. What happened? You've been
And that's literally the most
domesticated.
question of all. I used to get that all the time in my DMs. Like, what happened to you, man? You used to be cool. I'm like, oh, there you go.
And you shaved.
He did. I know. I didn't make him do that.
Beard.
I like his beard, but I like his face too.
You look like a baby.
So often we have an idea of what we want to talk about, and sometimes we just don't. We just come in and have a chat. Last week we talked about feminism and the sexual revolution. That was a really interesting conversation with Darlene Lev. And this week we were just kind of chatting before coming live, and people had some thoughts. I know Jenny probably wants to talk about woke right with Benjamin.
I don't know. Is that dried up? Is that conversation dried up?
Deborah?
Well, I do too, except honestly, I'm afraid that I am thinking differently than a lot of you guys are about this. And I notice I actually feel fear about it. Like, it's like, uh-oh, am I going to be somebody that disagrees and will be sort of cast out, or they'll be like, well, she's so past, she doesn't get it, like that whole thing. So I'm just going to say that.
I'll cancel you if that's your fetish.
Let's cancel Deborah.
I'm seeing a lot of energy that I find quite frightening around this topic, and just energy and disposition and way people are behaving, that I'm going, it's just looking like what the woke people look like, and so I get nervous about that. I'm like, these were things that we didn't like. And so I'm like, oh, this is interesting. So I thought I'd get that right out of the gate.
What a brave thing to be here and to say that. And if more people had done that, if more people had conducted themselves in the way that you are today, Deborah, perhaps we wouldn't have gotten ourselves in such a mess. So I think that your perspective bears, exploration, and you deserve thanks and admiration for being honest about how you're feeling.
Yeah. Marie Picard says if they cast you out, they are acting woke. And that's right. That's kind of that pattern, right? We cannot tolerate disagreement. I think it's healthy to disagree.
Yeah. I mean, of course, we're going to come and shave your pets, but...
My pecs? I was wondering, because they're kind of getting hairy.
Just think about your hamster pink and shivering, and reconsider, whether you are
worth it.
Whether you're fine, reconsider your positions there, Deborah.
Nice cat you have there. Yeah, right.
It's one of those hairless ones. No, my friends.
Is there specific behavior, Deborah, that you have? You brought up something along the lines of a vibe that you're uncomfortable with, but is there something specific, and how does it constitute itself? Through behavior, through critical consciousness, through something theoretical?
Yeah, it's kind of a little bit of all of it. And again, like, I want to make clear, because I think, for some people, even bringing up this thing seems so ridiculous. You're like, look, I mean, I could go on about X problems with woke, the left, what we've been talking about all this time. I don't deny that's there. I don't deny that's a problem. I don't, you know what I mean? Like, it's like, oh my God, we have to do something about it. So it's not like I've blinded myself to that. And it's more like there's like this whiff, right? It's like, and I think it's a combination of, there's a feeling of the combo of the grievance and the bitterness. That's one piece of it. with understandable reasons why people are upset on the right, understandable why there's things that they want corrected that is not working. I'd see again, and it's not everywhere either, right? Like it's not. I think Jenny, we were talking about. It's not like it's all MAGA, or it's not like it's all Christians, or it's not like it's all. It's just kind of this thing that's sort of like. And again, maybe my antenna are oversensitive, and there's not a thing, right? But there's something that has also, and yeah, James Lindsay has been talking about it. But there are. I've noticed, say with like, Tucker or like what's his name. Like Martyr Made, like some of the people that are kind of wanting to do a bit of the revisionist history, it feels like to me a parallel to what's happened on the left about like, well, we're going to have the 1619 project. Well, maybe this wasn't really what happened in World War II. And there's one thing about questioning narratives that actually are actually historically false. It's another about kind of constructing like a whole other thing that just feel constructivist to me in some sense. So I get nervous.
Veering away from truth and a veering towards preferred narrative.
Yeah, and then the identity piece. And again, I struggle. I listened to a really good interview the other day. There's a guy I actually know from Braver Angels, and he had someone on who was very concerned about, like wanting to have his white identity and really feeling like that needs to be used and worked with in order to fight back about certain things. And then there was another person on there that was, concerned about that. And like, it was a really nuanced conversation, and I liked it because you could both appreciate the fear of someone who says, well, my God, like the whole, white thing has been so completely degraded and put down and dehumanized. And how can we possibly even fight back unless we actually organize and take action together? But I also see it as just responding to like the dialectic and just they want you to get the white identity so then they can rail against it to be like, look, you're being white. You know what I mean? So I kind of go, don't fall in that trap. Like,
yeah, 1000%. If any, like I will open the. I'm happy to have that conversation, but I will just say anyone who is starting to rail around their white identity and identify with that, just like look in the mirror and say, the woke people owned me. And they are playing me like a violin right now. And they have won me over. They've made me play their game. Like that is just so terrible to know that the woke people have been successful enough that there are groups of white people that are wanting to begin to play that game.
So if you just say, let's say you live in Ireland and you're of Irish stock, your family's been there for centuries, and all of a sudden this neoliberal program is instituted to import millions upon millions of people from Somalia and third world countries into your country. How do you resist that without taking seriously your identity as something distinct from somebody else's identity? And if the liberals are saying, if you cling to your white identity, you fall into this woke trap. Here, take another Somalian next door.
This is where I think
race and culture are different. Like there's a difference between race and culture. Oh, yes. The fact that sometimes they overlap. There's nothing about one's race that predetermines their cultural assumptions.
So we could just be swapped out. One person is no different than another. If you exported the United States Constitution to Africa, another United States would form because there's no difference between people. It's all just propositional cultural understanding. If you reprogram people, they would just behave differently. And that tracks across genetic pools. Absolutely.
It absolutely tracks across genetic pools. Of that, I have no doubt. I don't think you can take one culture and switch it out with another, but I think race has 0% influence on culture.
Well, it's
Zero?
kind of a bit of I think it's a bit of a red herring because when you're talking about race, what we're actually really talking about is culture. Like, we don't derive our culture from our white skin, or a Somalian doesn't derive their culture from their melanated skin. It's from being in Somalia and growing up in Somalia with Somalian culture. So, I mean, whether we're using them interchangeably or we're making an overly big distinction, I'm not entirely sure. But like, what we're really talking about is culture, which has physical, like, people of different cultures have certain different physical characteristics. But the idea of race at all is so poisonous in terms of like the way everyone interprets it. Whether it should be or not is not what I'm trying to get at. That, you know, what Benjamin is asking is a question that it isn't. Maybe you wouldn't agree with me, Benjamin, but I personally, you don't have to make it about race. It is about culture, and cultures are entirely not interchangeable, and they are extremely formative. In fact, they're the most formative thing that we all experience.
I think the problem with the discussion around race is that it's really difficult to enter into it without giving liberals the ick. We've all of us in this stream, grew up in the 80s, 90s, and were sculpted into a certain culture that is multi-ethnic and anti-bigotry, anti-race. But if you look at any other races that grew up in that culture other than those of European stock, they all were allowed to cling to and bring with them some sort of in-group preference and some sort of out-group, the opposite of preference. It's just, we are, I think it's low class for us to think in terms of race. And so what we end up doing is making blank slate arguments where there's no biology at all. And any sort of data that brings up biology, we're like, well, we can't really touch that because this is toxic. Like, this is kind of woke. That's toxic. Those ideas are toxic. So we can't talk about them. We have to go forward and kind of talk around them by switching out culture with biology, when biology is biology. Where does culture come from if not biology? I guess
But
history.
So you've got white people, and some are extremely progressive, living some hippie weird life, and you've got some, I don't know, it's like somebody in a more rural area who's white, who is Christian and conservative. Like, can you say those are even the same culture, but they're both white? So I don't know. I mean, maybe we all like hamburgers. I don't know. I mean, I'm kind of trying to, in this particular country, trying to make a case for white as some unifying thing, except being
I agree with Deborah on this.
Negative. Like, we all unify on being told white's bad.
Mm-hmm. I don't think white is bad, but I also don't think it's a coherent racial category that makes any sense, except as a sort of identifier of exclusion. Like, white is just not dark, not dark skin. White skin is just somebody who is not of XYZ categories. I have more in common with a Black American of about my age than I do with somebody who grew up in Denmark. And the culture is much more important, I would say.
I do want to go back to
you probably have more in common, though, with a person who grew up in Denmark, whatever race they are, than a person who grew up in Somalia. Mm-hmm. And I think sort of what Benjamin was sort of alluding to or approaching is that if you bring in people from a vastly different culture, it is going to change the host culture. And I think that brings up a question of how does a person defend the importance of their own culture and the integrity of their own culture, especially in a climate where anything that might even approach an implication of race or valuing one's own people would lead to, people's hair catching on fire and accusations of racism or white supremacy or whatever. It seems like other cultures, and because they're in often in other countries, they're other races, are allowed to feel proud and to talk about the particular qualities and characteristics of their culture and try to preserve it. But we in the West are not. And I think if you can't value something, you can't protect it. And if you can't even talk about it, you're in trouble.
Yeah, and I don't have the problem with the culture piece. I mean, like Jenny, what you're dealing with in Ireland, for example, right? You're watching it become this like universalized, like, I don't know what to call it, right? Like kind of stripped of having an identity at all, right? And so I don't like seeing that. You know, I don't think even Americans would like seeing that. They want to go to some other country and they go there and Ireland isn't even like Ireland anymore. Like, why would you go there?
That's right.
You know?
But I think, and what Benjamin is saying, and he's absolutely right. You're absolutely right. It gives us majorly the ick, and it I immediately feel like nervous. But you know, white people are the only people who aren't allowed to say, actually, no, I have boundaries. We and our entire lives. I mean, obviously, it's gotten much more extreme in the last 5 to 10 years. But as you said, Benjamin, we've been sculpted into this multicultural thing, and it was working fairly well, I might add. So it's not beyond the bounds of possibility that it might work again. But certainly now, and certainly in Ireland, 100%, regular people are not allowed to say, actually, the people who come in here who are, well, I was going to say they're not white. Actually, in the case of one murder, it was a Bulgarian, so that's a European, person, although he's a gypsy, whatever, I don't know. But, these people are coming in, they're committing violent crimes. Okay. So we're not talking about like, it's a matter of, I'm trying to maintain some sort of purity. It's like Irish people are being victims of murders and rapes and stabbings and whatnot. And this thing of, well, if you complain about that, then you're racist. Now, of course, racist people are going to capitalize on this and point to the, like the noticing thing, but the point is, is it true? That is the question that we need to ask ourselves. Are these people that are committing the crimes coming in here with no vetting, and they're coming in from, like, I would say subpar cultures, and they are harming the locals? And when the locals are get restive about that, the elites in our own country literally take a dump on us and say that we're being racist and we shouldn't say those things. I mean, there was a case of the young woman who was murdered by the Bulgarian, her fiance. She was a 24-year-old something school teacher, like beautiful young woman. She was an Irish musician, and she had one like prime of her life, and she was murdered randomly while she was out for a jog. And the man who murdered her had been living on benefits in Ireland for 10 years. And this Irish state was supporting him and his 5 children and his entire extended family. And there's no reason for this murder whatsoever. Her fiance, when it came to the sentencing of this man, got up and said, why are we letting people in who are not, like, this man destroyed a woman who is contributing to society, and why was he here living off and not contributing to our society? And not only was he not contributing to our society, he murdered my fiance. And one of Ireland's sort of premier journalists, who happens to share my last name, no relation, went on RTE, which is the public broadcaster, and chastised this young man and said that was a terrible thing to say. He's giving ammunition to the far right. And I'm sorry, but she can get bent. Okay, what you have to acknowledge is the truth in your opposition. So imagine that I'm the liberal and I'm the person who's worried about the race element of this. And to be perfectly honest, I am worried about the race element of this because it's a very thorny issue. But the only honest conversation has to start from acknowledging the truth in your opponent's point. And that is what the liberals cannot do. They cannot do that. They cannot do that in the United Kingdom. They cannot do that in Ireland, and they cannot do it in the United States. So some way we have to find a path to have a discussion that isn't entirely radioactive, because it does contain a racial element. I don't know how to do that. I feel uncomfortable with that. But it has to be done by someone. And of course, then you add the element of internet. So everyone's like setting their hair on fire and being bombastic because there's no filter, and also you get clicks, and there's a whole other that's a whole other discussion, like that ecosystem. But if there isn't a way that we can have an honest conversation about that, it will get exponentially worse. I mean, I am hearing things now from people that I've never heard before in my life. People are very fed up. People are very, very fed up in the United Kingdom and Ireland. And I'm not going to throw them under the bus, because my liberal upbringing and my liberal training is like, oh, well, I don't want to say bad things about people of color, which is true. I have no desire to do that. But like, unless you can deal with the truth of the matter, you are going to actually turn everyone into an actual racist, like a real one, for real.
Yeah. And you're absolutely right. And this fear of these discussions and the inhibition about the discussions is what I think enabled all of those grooming gangs that raped and trafficked thousands of girls across England. That enabled that, because the social workers and the police would do nothing about it, because the people who were running these gangs were, Muslims, often from Pakistan, and they did not want to be perceived as racist. And some of the agencies have even admitted that some of the reports they just wouldn't deal with because they didn't want to be called racist. And so they let children in some cases, these young girls, be raped and trafficked, gang raped. I mean, it's so shameful. And do any of us really think that if hordes of white Christians moved into a Muslim country and were trafficking and raping and beating and sometimes setting on fire Muslim girls, that they would tolerate it? They certainly wouldn't, nor should they. But
there would be
England tolerated it.
Yeah. When hordes of Christians moved into those countries, we call it colonialism. And the place was exploited for goods, but was in exchange a societal organization which has collapsed since the departure of Christians from those areas occurred. That's just what happened. That's historical fact. I don't know. This conversation is so fascinating because it's got so much ick to it that if you venture into it, you get this whole the woke right thing going on, like where you can't even have a conversation about it unless you really strictly adhere to liberal priors.
I want to say something about that ick. Go ahead, Deborah.
I want to say, like, anything we've talked about here in terms of these facts, like, I don't have a problem with it. It's kind of when it either starts becoming some sort of, and I'm not, we have to be an only white country, or where it's been coming with the Jewish thing too. It's like been coming around, like everything's the Jews amongst some aspects of that too. Like, so there's the conspiratorial, like there's one single group that's responsible for everything. So it's kind of like those things, just saying like, wow, we have a problem with these particular groups. There's more crime. I think those conversations need to be had. Like, I wouldn't call that woke right. Now, if someone's doing it with a weird, like, peppy meme and like nasty kind of vibey thing going on with it, like then I'm a little bit like, I don't like that. But if it's like, okay, let's just talk about these facts and I'm not being sneering and jeering or whatever, right? Like, then it's like, because these are things we have to deal with. Like, even when you pose that question, like, what do we do? There's so many things I'm trying to figure out, like, what do we do? I don't entirely know the answer to these things, but I think they're important. I think especially on this immigration question, it's like, I do think we need to kind of pause and figure out what the heck is going on, right? And like, how do we want to proceed? So just so you know that that's the case for me. I'm not like, oh my God, we can't talk about this group coming in and causing problems, because I do think there are people that are causing problems.
I think something that's difficult for me is this idea of white as a cohesive group of any kind. I think that, European nation states warred against each other for so long and saw immense distinction between their different groups and nations, tribes. And white only becomes meaningful when it's being identified from the outside. I mean, Irish is meaningful. English is meaningful. Dutch is meaningful, but white is an amalgam. It's like in another one, and it strikes me exactly the same way, as brown. We started hearing this word brown people being used. And that was not, I don't think I ever heard that pre-2015. I don't think I ever heard anybody called a brown person, because what are you talking about? Are you talking about, seriously grouping Hispanic people along with Middle Eastern people and Indian and Pakistani people, and you're putting them all into some category and calling it brown and acting like it means something about the substance of those individuals. It just doesn't. And so white is another one of those things. Like, I don't see white people out on the street and go, oh, my compatriot, like, I know you. I'm going to flash the white sign so that we,
Well, they did them.
it just doesn't, it's just meaningless. And so, I mean, European, I could say Caucasian, Euro-American, I don't know, Dutch, Scottish, I don't know, but just white is as meaningless as brown. It becomes meaningful when everything that is white is being attacked. And so it's a reflexive sort of reactionary stance to sort of embrace a white identity, I think. And I can see perhaps there's value in that at some points. Maybe like you think about any minority group like Black, right? Black people in America have created groups in order to support each other. We can say that that's gone too far, that's gone to an area that led to some of the identity politics. But it certainly started as a reaction to something where they were less politically significant and powerful, where they were being relegated to something lesser in society and needed the collective action to do that, to see each other as compatriot, to see each other that way and support each other. But I don't know. Gamma Yun. Well, Leslie, that's your programming that you don't know who your tribe is. Well, who's my tribe? Ooh. Because I didn't know that many people. I didn't know that many white people growing up, and they were very different from each other. The ones that I did know, there were the people in the trailer park who were missing their teeth and had too many kids running around with dirty diapers. I knew those white people. And then I had white family somewhere off in some other far distant place that I knew were white also. But the people that I knew in my day-to-day life, most of them weren't white, and I didn't see any similarity in the people that I knew that were white. That just people.
I think there's something. I do think that perhaps it is worth it to identify what we mean when we're talking about, for example, say Western culture, and I don't know that completely encompasses, say, Irishness, but I think it probably captures a lot of it. And so when we are resisting the transformation of countries through unlimited immigration, and we feel that we're losing something, I think it would be very interesting and useful to be able to speak to what it is we think we are losing without making reference to race. Because I maybe somebody understands something about this that I don't, but I just don't see that playing in. Like, what is it about our culture that we are wanting to preserve? And I don't know that race has to be a part of that conversation.
Well, you're just going to use words that race is a very useful term. If you look at the history, how it was developed and how it was deployed to do social engineering, culminating in the Civil Rights Act and then the perpetual iterations as the Civil Rights Act moved away from the historical necessity that we could probably morally agree with. There was a time when the Civil Rights Act was morally necessary to correct certain things, but that violated our First Amendment. That violated our freedom of association, and it was temporarily suspended. And the government used that, because this is what governments do, to encroach more and more into our freedoms, and to now tell us who we have to bake a cake for. Right? It's all part of a thing. But the concept of race was used throughout history for different purposes. And at this point in time, I hear you guys, and I agree that race, it's a really weird, stupid thing. And if you use the word white identity, you can mean it in a negative or a positive sense, or just like just a noticing sense and not noticing crime stats sense. But like, you notice when somebody is white, you notice when somebody's Caucasian, you notice when somebody's Latino, you notice when somebody's Black, and then you notice as you interact with these different different people that they kind of tend to have even different voice, different value systems sometimes not though. But there's like this general difference. But if you try to force it into being really distinct, you're losing the plot. And if you try to say it doesn't exist at all, you're losing the plot. So if you don't use race because you want to get away from the ick about that, just like we didn't want to use retard, we started using another word, special needs, right? Because retard got this, it glommed on to all this meaning by all these different ways of using that word derogatorily.
The euphemism
or for bad purposes that we don't agree with. So we don't want to use race because it's stained in our mind. We have been programmed. Everybody in this screen has been programmed. I remember when I was in second grade drawing pictures of Martin Luther King and how we can, race is evil. Racism is evil. That is the central sin of my race and of my country. But if you don't use race, you're going to end up using something else like that, like heritage or ancestry.
Well, in ethnicity, at least, or something.
Ethnicity means language, culture, and ancestry. So it's all a part of a thing, and it has to do with historical relationships that were, navigated over time. I think that I said this very recently in a video that I did, an interview that I did, that maybe it was just a conversation with Leslie, like the broadest way to go, if you want to escape race as a salient concept in order to understand group difference, and then in order to hopefully move towards intra-group harmony, if that's the intention, the broadest thing you can do when we say culture, we try to get as far away from race as possible. We get to culture, and I think language is probably the very broadest boundary that we can get from the particular to the general without being too supremacist. But even if you look at the way that American English is developed, different ethnicities within that use it differently. And
regions do too. I mean, even regions of the country that could be mixed, racially or whatever.
Yeah.
And then you start to understand that, like, yes, Appalachian is different than a New York Yankee. There's a difference between the Yankees and the Appalachians or the Southerners, but there's more conflict between them within that white group, that European group, than there is kind of, as long as the liberal program keeps working to harmonize us. There's more differences between the liberal and the conservative, at least online, than there is between the black conservative and the white conservative and the black liberal and the white liberal. Which is just, it's all just really interesting.
I mean, I think that's a really important point that you're making there, because I think about examples. I know I have good friends that are Black homeschooling families with very similar values to my own that I feel we share a lot of culture. There's a lot of cultural overlap and connection and being able to relate to one another. And then I think about, as an example, Benjamin, do you remember when we were on the airport shuttle a few months back? We were coming back from somewhere and we were on the shuttle to get to the place where we parked our car. And there's this, these three people. It's this woman and
it was a polycule.
I don't know what it was exactly. Yeah, three really unhealthy women. I think it was a woman with her two adult daughters, or an adult daughter and an adult daughter's friends. They were morbidly obese and dressed in like baby pajama kind of things, and with like binkies and little loveys and stuffies that they were like adult infants that were and like sucking their thumb and like sitting, and it was really strange. And they were on this thing with us, and I think bright colored hair and the whole nine yards. And these are people who are maybe genetically more similar to me than the homeschooling families that I'm describing. But I don't have, I look at that and I'm like, please don't put me in the room. When we go into the camps, put me in the camp with, I don't care, not them, Well,
that's an interesting thing. I think that is, I think that there might be some aspect to their genetic similarity to you that makes them even more repulsive than if they were of like further along in the genetic clade.
I don't know.
Because you don't want to be associated with them, and there's a container in which you are.
I didn't feel associated with them until you said white identity, and then I'm like, oh hell no! I'm sorry. It's the diagnosis of exclusion.
Yeah,
the class
exactly.
too, right? It's like you could have, I don't know if it's like Coleman Hughes has talked about it too, like you could have people that all went to college together and they're all these different races, but they're educated in the same milieu. There's the same sort of value set. They're all going to go get the job at Goldman Sachs or whatever the heck, right? Like, and then you could have people who are working class that are of mixed race who might relate. So I think there's so many other ways there's different slices, it seems like, that.
Somebody in the comments, and I didn't catch the name, and maybe I'm misremembering the fully accurate comment, but it was something like white is like something of a liberal invention, and it's not that long ago. White Americans were differentiated by ethnicity, and everyone knew who their tribe was. And I think that's exactly, I mean, that's touching on the class element somewhat, but like for a country that saw wave after wave of immigrants come in from various countries in Europe before my time, but I grew up in a world where you had the Polish Americans and you had the Irish Americans and you had the Italian Americans and then you had the Jews and then you had the blacks. I mean, that was New York City too. And although by the 80s, this was already the programming was already really coming on strong to kind of make us feel like the white guilt. That was definitely in process, Coming in before that, from my understanding of it, was like the interethnic, the relations between the ethnicities and the competition was worked out among themselves on the streets, in the neighborhoods, and sitting on top of all of this was a white elite. They were white at the time, almost exclusively, and of sort of like a waspy demographic themselves. And what I've noticed about that group is that there's like almost like a nihilistic loathing of humanity in people who are born into privilege. I've noticed this. Like there is this, I don't know where it comes from, and that would be a whole different discussion, but this sense of contempt for themselves and contempt for their fellow man. And it's almost like they've tried to import that self-loathing that they had, their own guilt about their own privilege, which was real, by the way. I mean, like there is an elite with privileges, and at one point they were entirely white. That's tried to impose that on regular people who before that were kind of working it out amongst themselves. And the reality of that, yes, was fights between neighborhood gangs and, hurty words and like sticks and baseball bats. I'm not trying to say it was like, roses and flowers and like fun times for everyone. And it would be totally fine if you were an Italian American girl in Bensonhurst bringing home a black boyfriend. I'm not saying that. There was racial strife. But it didn't become an overarching ideology that is now being used to bludgeon those people, i.e. like regular people like us. And so I think maybe that comment was really interesting in that this concept of whiteness is actually, obviously the concept of whiteness in the woke ideology is like borderline it's incipient genocidal as far as I'm concerned, because it's so full of hatred and resentment. But like even the way we use it I'm offended. That's what I'm saying. I'm offended by being called white. But from a right-wing way, not a left-wing way.
No, I do understand that.
There's
no, go on, Ben.
I was just going to make a joke. You should finish your offensive.
Well, because when people live in close proximity to each other in large urban centers, or even in sort of like hard scrabble or normal environments that aren't striving in a competition for status, like elite status, they will work these problems out as they go along. Like people used to work in factories together. People used to, take public transportation together. They worked out their own codes, and now we've just come along and really messed with all of that. And I don't see how, at least on the level of discourse, the situation has been improved.
Yeah, thinking about language as that broad container you were talking about, Benjamin, I think religion is another one, and it's I think you can have people from many, many different ethnic backgrounds if you share a basic set of cultural values. And
Yes.
I think that what we're seeing right now is a lot of disintegration in the post-Christian West.
Yes. Tim Pool was on Trigonometry recently and said something really interesting, and I hope I'm going to do it justice. He was challenging them kind of on the woke right thing a little bit. But they were having this discussion about principles. And, I think it was the trigonometry guys who were saying, you have to go from principles. And he said, well, do you think the state should have the power to decide medical decisions for a child, or do you think it's the parents? And they said, oh, it's the parents. And he said, well, what if the parent refuses to give a child a blood transfusion because it's against their religion? He said, principles are not enough. Principles are not your foundation. Your morals have to be your foundation. And the problem is we no longer live in the same moral universe as we once did. In fact, half of us don't even recognize that morals exist at all.
Right.
And therefore, we cannot actually, all of our legal system is based on a shared morality, which we no longer have. So none of these laws make sense. For every law that might make sense in one instance, it can be used for a horror in another instance, the same law. So what we need to do is, and how we do this, I don't know, but we need to kind of get on the same page about what our basic morals are, and how the hell do you do that without religion?
There's something unusual right now. This is just a side comment. We've got 2 thumbs downs. I never get thumbs downs on these streams. So somebody's upset about they're upset about Benjamin. So
it's my beard.
Go in there and hit the like to counter that thumbs down, if you will. Yeah, they hate your shaven face, Benjamin.
Your lack of beard is freaking me out.
It is perturbing. Yeah. Well, if you think of the word Black Pride, you're like, okay, whatever. Latino pride, right? I think the only pride that white people can have is gay pride. That's the whitest pride on the the block.
So true.
And 5 days from now, we get a whole month of it. Maybe they're putting the gay away a little bit this year. But I think it peaked in 2022. I think 23 maybe is when it took over the White House. They kept on going further and further and further. I think it was last year they started pulling back. So it's interesting to see how that particular identity, Bacchanalia, will shape up or ship out.
It's really something to sit with a young person and try to talk with them when this person has been raised completely amorally, doesn't have a sense of morals, except, there's no backstop. There's no, it's just do what you will. Maybe kind of generally don't hurt other people. And then you try to talk to this kid and you have no tools. What are your tools to work with when this child, you're not calling them back to something that they learned before and reminding them of something. And you're speaking from a secular training that gives you no moral tools to work with. It really is quite something. I was thinking about that when you were speaking, Jenny. It is tremendously challenging to talk with young people right now.
In my limited experience, I have a fraction of the experience that you have speaking honestly and sincerely and deeply with the youth, Leslie, but it just strikes me. I have had a few interviews with young men that embrace to one degree or another the transgender ideology, and it affects them. It definitely affects them differently than the females, in a very particular way. Where I start to talk about sexuality with them, and they have absolutely no morality about sexuality. It's like this vacuousness around it that's startling to me, because there's no shame. They start dressing up as, sorry to get a little bit graphic, that this is the state. One kid, he had autogynephilia because of some sissy memes that he saw on Instagram. And he kind of just gets more and more into this thing. And then the next thing you know, he starts dressing up at college, and then he starts going to movie theaters and getting banged by men, even though he's not even gay. They're there's no shame. It's
this is exactly,
and it's that's just what happened. That's just what happened. Dude, you have no direction at all.
They've been raised completely on a consent and pleasure-based system when it comes to sex. If it makes you feel good, go ahead and do it. Just be aware, some people might whatever. So consent, but there's no moral backstop to it. And
Yeah.
Deborah,
And the peer pressure is never in the direction, oh, don't do that. The peer pressure is like, oh, you have to be cool, so
yeah,
do that. Otherwise, you're uptight or whatever.
I'm interested, Leslie, in what you think will happen with that. Like, do you think that it's possible that sort of morally we're in maybe like an experimental, exploratory phase, and a new sort of moral code will arise through experience and trial and error? Or what do you suspect will happen?
I do think so. In fact, I think that we're seeing quite a big backlash against the sexual revolution and the licentiousness of the modern era. I don't know what that's going to look like, because unless women and men can get on the same page with each other and see that they're actually on the same team, this is going to get uglier and uglier, because it's kind of right now devolving into a finger pointing war. And I think that we're in a pretty precarious and scary place. But I think that there's a potential for something much more
But also, Leslie,
traditional to arise.
What you had suggested earlier was that this idea that the Christian men becoming enthralled to porn, and how this is a problem for Christian women. So practicing Christians, not people who are taught and raised in a very particular moral framework. This is the problem, when the outside culture is always going to be dominant, unless you're like Amish, and not even then. So like not even moral framework isn't enough to withstand the power and the seduction of the image being pumped into your brain via the internet. So, I mean, I'd take the Christian framework over zero framework, but even that isn't enough. I mean, look at all these Christian denominations that have the pride flags and everything. I mean, if the Christians, the American Christians and the Church of England and the Church of Ireland were not able to withstand the societal pressure and uphold their actual foundational morality, like, what's it going to take for that morality to come back? And again, what is that? What is it going to like? Because the problem has been pushed to the extremes. The same with the immigration debate. The steps that it will take to get back to the healthy moral foundation are going to look very ugly. Mm-hmm. That's what they're going to look like.
Right. And
we're either going to have
give this context real quick, Benjamin, if you don't mind. Or Benjamin, go ahead, and then I'll give it.
It was just a sentence. Yeah. We're either going to have a revival or a revolution.
Yes.
I sent you guys this morning this link. The Feminist Turned Housewife is an account that I follow on Twitter, and she says the amount of heartbroken Christian women in Christian groups dealing with husbands addicted to porn is absolutely insane. And then she got a bunch of responses basically saying men use porn because their wives won't have sex with them, and what else are they supposed to do? And there was she posted a follow-up that was, if only she had more sex with him, he wouldn't need porn. Quote, this is one of the most manipulative, false, and degrading lies pushed onto women, and it needs to die. Porn addiction isn't about lack of sex. It's about lust, disordered desire, and self-centeredness. Anyway, I know we only have like 10 minutes to go, so it's not a great time to dive into a whole new topic. But on the topic of morality, we do have... I always think of this phrase that you used, Jenny, about a sexual arms race, and this kind of threat hanging over you. If you don't conform to this thing, then I'm going to do this. There's always prostitution. We've just lost our way so completely. And it is interesting to see that this is springing up for so many Christian people as well, who seem to have an ideology that would ward against things like this, but has somehow a loophole is being carved.
Can I ask a question of the men? I mean, you might not want to answer it personally. Maybe you could talk generally, because I have always wondered, I mean, there's more libido. Men have stronger sex drive. And I've always wondered, like, oh, so how do we live with that, where there isn't a symmetry, generally speaking, between sort of female desire for sex and male? And, you know, how much then this restraint piece, like how hard is that to do if one has just much more, right? Like, I don't know how, I mean, we're asking men to do something that is probably fairly hard. I mean, women have to do things that are very hard to deal with too. But I've just wondered, like, does it feel like, well, you're both married, so you're figuring this out. But like, I don't know how much men are being asked, because I don't really know what the male sex drive is actually like, to have a more, restrained sexuality that is kept in relationship and isn't going off to porn or something like that. And you could maybe speak in general if you don't want to speak personally. I just want to kind of understand that.
I think that a great deal of respect needs to be given to the power of the libido. And I do think it can ruin people's lives. I mean, it kind of sucks. And I do think that young boys need to be sat down and to be given clear direction on how to handle that, because it is a very, very, very powerful force. And it's not just about the sex, but it's the attraction to women in general is a part of that, and it is something to be contained. And it's a mistake to pretend that force doesn't exist. Having said that, there's like some very common sense things that people can do. One is to recognize how powerful it is, and don't put yourself in situations where things can get out of control, because it's one of those things that can really get away from a person. In my practice, I most of what brings people in the door is infidelity, and and these aren't like evil people. It's just wrong place, wrong time. And you didn't, and it's not always men who initiate these things, but it like when it is wrong place, wrong time, and not enough respect for the power of the libido, like those are common factors. But that's for me. I think the power of it needs to be respected and understood.
Benjamin, do you have a response?
Whatever you say, my dear.
Okay. Well, I think that it's a compromise. I think that I honestly think that there's a lot of compromising that needs to happen. I think in a healthy relationship, if you're two people, one person has a higher sex drive and one person has a lower sex drive, however that distributes, which is usually in the typical pattern, then both people have to do some compromising. Men maybe aren't going to get as much sex as they want. Women have to have more sex than they want. I mean, there's a meeting in the middle. You have to be able to see this as a sacred relationship and find a way to take care of yourself and your partner. I think porn is this illusory third option, because it looks like this harmless thing, like, oh, it's private, it's just me, I'm just alone. But really what you're engaging with something that's making the world worse. You're making the world worse when you do that. You're making your relationship worse in some direct ways by channeling your energy into something else. There are lots of reasons why that harms the relationship that would take me too long to talk about right now. But you're also encouraging a market for something that's leading to the degradation of other people. You're sacrificing young women and encouraging them to sacrifice themselves and make themselves worth less, not worthless, but worth less as partners. You're paying into the system that you're complaining about. So I would say sacrifice, but I'm not a man, so.
But I think sacrifice is a thing that people need to acquaint themselves with in general. Women do, men do, on a whole host of things. I mean, this is why, and I mention this kind of frequently, the concept of vice and not indulging in vice on every whim. And our society is not set up for that at all. It's the opposite. It caters to all of our vices. We, on our phone, we just pick it up and like with a touch of a finger, if your vice is shopping, you've got Amazon. If your vice is porn or sex, you've got porn, there's no self-control anymore. We're all like emotionally and like sexually incontinent at this point, on a macro level.
Yeah, that's an interesting way to put it. But it is all available. Like back in the day, if you wanted to, I don't know, if you wanted to look at pictures of naked women, you'd have to like go in the store. I remember this is kind of funny. My wife and I, when she was my girlfriend, we were first experimenting with sex. We went to a bookstore. It was whatever was around in the malls before Barnes and Noble, and we were like gonna buy this like sex book, and like we first we had to like sit there and decide which one we want, and there's like people all around us, and then she's like, all right, you do it, and then so we picked the one we wanted, and then I had to go up to the counter with this. And sure enough, the clerks like gave me a look like, "Oh, we know what you're going to be doing tonight, Spank Boy." And it's like, so I don't know. It's like these days, like it's like you can just, I don't know, click a button, and so it is harder to, and and that's kind of a funny story, but it's to illustrate that it was maybe easier then to it's so easy now, like with the advent of a phone, to like, I don't know, sext a work colleague, or just like push a conversation a little bit in that direction, or whatever. It's so I think with that increased access to that sort of thing, that should be countered with an increased awareness of just how powerful the forces behind that are. And it doesn't have to be like a moral finger wagging kind of conversation, but it just has to be like, look, this is not something you want to mess around with, because at some point you lose your ability to make decisions if you let this get to a certain point, and you don't want to mess around with that.
Yeah, I think that the popular move, and I don't think it's just, I mean, to say it's the sexual revolution's fault is broadly true, but the move away from shame-based moral enforcement to what acceptance and then celebration that reached its peak, hopefully, with Pride Month a couple of years ago, has left a lot of men adrift, and relearning shame, like understanding what shame was there for, and seeing what can be actually replaced with it if we don't want to go back towards shame. But behind, like, there's social stigma and stuff, but like when you try to reattain a moral behavior, there is an element of disgust that you begin to feel with yourself. You do have to interact with the dirt that you interacted with, or that you either put in you or was in you to begin with. And that's really disconcerting, and it's really difficult to sit with that. And without a moral structure that articulates that shame, that self-disgust, into a process of purification, into a process of forgiveness and redemption, and social renewal, I don't see how we actually inspire people becoming better. And you can, on the male side of the discourse, there is different tacks to shaming people for porn, to just kind of one way of going about it without directly shaming it, which is kind of, sorry to say this, longhouse coded, is just say that's haram. It's just disgusting. Like you're boxing yourself in, you're making yourself weak. Not like you dirty pig, you. It's like you weak, pathetic thing, you. Right? That's kind of the different way of using social engineering, or like the social pressure, I guess, to help correct young men. But Aaron, I really do like what you say. Like, if it begins in respect for yourself, for that power, for yourself, and then for your wife, and then for what its purpose is, and then rediscovering what sex's purpose is, and the beauty and the bounty of it. is actually the other side of the equation. It's like, look, you're kind of lost in goon world, and there's actually all this other stuff that if you let go of that you can possibly get access to, but you actually have to go through kind of a dark night of the soul and a dark kind of like, you have to exit the goon cave into reality, and maybe hopefully a Plato's muse will be there to pick you up along a part of your journey. And I do think that a part of the journey of healing from porn is rediscovering a sexual relationship, and is actually, that's a part of it. Like giving up porn is one step, and understanding that. And then, but actually understanding that unless you're a saint, you're going to need to have that satisfied. And so then finding it, recontextualizing it into a relationship, and then having to undergo all the massive amount of change and responsibility and work that a relationship actually provides. And you're like, well, why am I even doing this? Like, you can always revert back into the womb, back into your goon cave. You could always go that way, but that's not where manhood is. Manhood is in this other direction.
Yeah, I think manhood is an important word in that context, and I think there's I think I said something about this last week, that there is something masculine, or there is something to one's masculinity about being self-possessed, and it's not to say you won't ever slip, but just to be smart and to respect the forces that exist in your life, and to be wise about the power of those forces.
Well, I wonder also, like, what is the one of the counter arguments that you often see about in this case is, what about men who are involuntarily celibate, like a man who has absolutely no prospects of relationship? Let's just take hypothetically that he really doesn't, and that it's not, for whatever reason in the hypothetical. Does he get a pass? Is there some sort of, does he get some moral cheat code where, no, but for you, it's okay. You go ahead and use prostitution, or AKA porn.
Right. Yeah. Well, I want to, I don't know.
That would be a good topic for a full hour.
Talking absolutes is tricky, but the involuntarily celibate thing, I think what people are missing there, is that they're probably not looking closely enough at why it is that they're not getting access to sex. That there's somebody for everybody, and if you want to meet a girl, you just go out there and meet one. And if that's not happening, then you need to ask yourself, why is that, and look at that very carefully, because I'm afraid that a lot of the people that fall into that camp are allowing fear to be converted into anger and resentment. And if you can address that fear, perhaps of humiliation, directly, I think you're going to find your chances of meeting interesting women who are interested in you is going to go up substantially.
Well, I agree with Jennifer that this would be a good topic for a longer discussion. Maybe we can do it. Deborah, did you want to you had something to say? I want to give you the last word.
Yeah, just a quick thing. It's sort of going back a few steps, but in terms of the shaming piece, I do wonder if even as these people are engaging in this porn, if there actually isn't already shame. Like, I don't know if they necessarily have to be talked into it. I'm wondering if any of it's there just as it is. But I think what your guys are pointing to is like, you could kind of shame them in some sense, but to have this higher aspiration, I think, is what's appealing, right? If there is this thing, like you were already saying, Aaron, like how to be a man, and this is and that actually feels ennobling. And then it's instead of like, whatever. I mean, you can point out the ills of all of it, but I think speaking to something that is even more satisfying, and it's going to require their effort, and it's going to require, but it's a mission or something, right? Like, so I think that might be more successful, because I do wonder if there isn't, I mean, we've talked about these places where guys are trying to quit porn, go and write things, and they feel a lot of shame. And so I feel like the shame element might already be there. It's not enough to stop them. So I don't know if more shaming is going to stop them, but something aspirational might help them out. I don't know.
Do we have time for a quick story about this?
I don't know, Jennifer, are you
I actually have to go.
Yeah,
I have to go, but you guys are welcome.
Bye, Jen.
continue.
Does everybody? Bye,
Jen.
Jennifer. Does
Bye,
everybody else
guys.
have
Thanks,
like
everyone.
5 more minutes? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, Aaron, go for it.
I'm thinking about a time in my life where this really stands out to me, and it was about the time that all of my friends were getting married. And because we were all getting married, everyone was having a stag night. And they kept saying, come to the stag night. We're going to go out and we're going to, go to the strip bars. And I didn't really want to do that. I was I was much more sort of romantically minded. I just was one of those people who always wanted to be married. And which is not to say I wasn't interested in sex. It's just, for me, I didn't go lusting after people that I wasn't interested in having a relationship with. But when I finally did go, because it was like my best friend was going, and I was either engaged at this point. I wasn't married yet. I think I was engaged. And I asked my girlfriend or fiance at the time, I'm like, well, they want me to do this. Is it okay? And she was kind of like rolled her eyes and was like, yeah, go ahead. And I went, and I hated it because I felt so out of control. It was like what I imagined the first hit of heroin would be like. Like
Really?
just to be surrounded. Oh yeah, like to be in a room with naked women, which I had never experienced before. And, then my friend was like, the next week, he's like, hey, let's go to a strip club. I'm like, no way. He's like, why?
Huh.
I'm like, and I was a young man at this time. I was very young. So I didn't have a sophisticated way of saying, like, I never want to feel that out of control again. Like it was, I can see where it's enticing. I can see where it's addicting. But I did not like that because it was so alluring. Like it just, I hated it. And then, yeah.
Can I add to that with my strip club experience?
Yeah.
I was working at Powell's in Portland and in the coffee shop there, and I was walking the friend who got me the job. He was pregnant. Home, we were going to the bus to get home, and she's pregnant, so she really needed to pee. So we went into this burrito place, and it shared a bathroom with this strip club called Mary's. That was like, it was like kind of like a strip commune. Like it was woman owned and operated, and they did tip sharing or whatever. I don't know, some sort of comic gig. And so, like, I kind of walked her in, and then I was just in a strip club. I'm like, okay, well, I'll wait here. And I saw this naked hoochie up on the stage, and I'm like, I noticed the same thing as you. Like, that is incredibly powerful. Yeah. That woman is incredibly powerful. And my attention went to her. I could feel the power of my attention going to her and intermingling with, I could feel all the other men, all of their attention mingling with mine. And the quality of that attention was disgusting. I'm like, I don't want to wed my attention to their attention. Like I could feel us all going and looking at her in a certain way. There's ways to look at a naked woman that are not necessarily lustful. I mean, there's power and there's lust there, but the concentration of a very base hungering lust. Yeah. It was just like, that's, I want to appreciate a woman because they are powerful, but this is not the right way to do that. This is actually sacrilegious to the power of the female for me. And so it was so weird. I was with my pregnant friend too. So I had this kind of like this other kind of feminine influence that I was basking in. And to have that set aside, it was very educational.
Yeah. That's amazing. Those two stories back to back are incredible. Wow.
Yeah. It's crazy stuff. It really is. Anyway, it's not. I'm glad to be getting a little bit older and to be not so. Yeah, right.
I have two strip club stories too. I'll tell you my two strip club stories. So when
I'm Lele, I'm listening. I'm just going to get us both coffee.
Oh, thank you. That's nice. Yeah, so when my daughters, I was a single mom. I divorced when I was 25. Yeah, I guess around 25. And I had my two girls were, let's see, 6 and 4, I guess they would have been. And they started going to an elementary school. I had to move to another area, and they went to this little elementary school that was mostly low-income families from the apartments around the area. And it was a great little school, and it was right next door to a strip club. Because
Getting permission for that.
well,
Zoning.
yeah, that was the decency laws. This was grandfathered in because it was situated there prior to the whatever laws that you couldn't have those kind of establishments. And so I didn't have a whole lot of firm, solid opinions about prostitution, sex work, stripping. At that point, I kind of generally thought it was not a good idea, but I didn't have a lot of real strong opinion. But as my girls were at that age where you're starting to read, and they'd read all the street signs and all the billboards, I remember always being really afraid that they would read that and ask me, because they would have these really racy slogans on their thing right outside. And I can remember just being so like worried about the moment when that would happen. And there was something about the proximity of the elementary school and my girls, thinking about this in relationship with my daughters, that really made it click for me that all of the people working in there are somebody's daughter. Those are all somebody's little girl that they didn't want, that they had hopes and dreams for and loved and thought about how she would read. And maybe they didn't love her. Maybe she was mistreated. Maybe there was something wrong, but they were all somebody like my girls. They were all that. And it really changed that proximity changed my perspective.
Yeah. Well, that was really, I thought you were going to tell us a story about a bachelorette party and the human tripod or something, Leslie.
Oh, no, I've actually never been to a strip club. My other story is a sad one, though, and it's that my ex-husband, I didn't know, but he was actually a frequent visitor. Thank you. Thank you for the coffee. And actually, I worked partly because he insisted on it. That I worked the whole time I was raising our sons, at least part-time. And at one point, I found out he was spending more money a month than I was making at strip clubs. And I was working, and I was like 8 months pregnant, taking my son to work, and working hard to make money. And I looked at when I discovered this, he was actually spending more. So, and that I had no idea. I had no idea that he was doing that.
It's, I mean, that just, I don't mean to say that the libido is in charge of that when, it sounds like someone could have a real personality problem. But but I do understand how people get caught in that trap. It's a very, very, very powerful force, and it needs to be.
Jenny had a guy who wrote to her on her blog and on her Substack for a while, and he was talking about this, and I think that his points were really good. This is pornography. Children are discovering this really young, and it's sexual abuse of these children. This is sexual abuse of boys. These boys, as girls too, but the boys that are being shown porn before they're able to have any kind of a sexual awakening or relationship with a woman or a girl. This is changing them, and it's abuse of them. It's messing them up.
And it's, I mean, again, like, I don't want to overly disclose, but I remember the first, again, it used to be like a lot harder to get actual access to this. But, when I was like 12, my best friend had a dad who had an extensive collection. And I remember he's like, "You want to see this?" And I was like, yeah. And again, like the response that I had to it was so intense. It was almost painful. It was like, oh my God, I love that. But oh my God, like this is, I felt like I don't know what to do with this. And I can't even imagine if, a kid, I was 12 or 13 at the time, but I think 12. but like, yeah, it's just like I just the power of this really needs to be respected, and that needs to be talked about in conjunction with whatever other policies are being considered, and it needs to be approached very carefully, I think.
Wow, this is such a good conversation, and thank you all for entertaining us for 20 minutes longer.
I want to know, so those who listen to it, leave a comment. Which was the spicier part of the conversation? The race or the gender/sexuality?
What do you think? We'll see.
And join us next week when we started on Pride.
We should. I know. Next week, we'll have Pamela Garfield Yeager on with us to discuss what's going on in the counseling profession right now. Some big stuff. Erin talked a little bit about this last week.
Oh, yeah, so we'll
get into some of the movement there and some of the craziness, too, because she's she's in the trenches learning about how nuts it really is. So thank you guys for a great chat today. And thanks to Jen, who's no longer here, but we'll see her next week. And thanks everybody for joining us in the chat. Please leave comments. Let us know what you thought. Yeah. All right.
Rock and roll.
Have a good one. Later. Have a great week.